From the Telesur headquarters in Caracas, Venezuela, welcome back to From the South. I am Luis de Jesus. Let's take a look at our headlines. In Bolivia, the Supreme Court enacted a law that establishes the 18th of October as the date for the general elections, while block votes continue for the 11th day of protests. Russian government denounces foreign interference in the internal affairs of Belarus and blames Western powers for the violent protests. And government of Palestine has rejected the agreement between Israel and the United Arab Emirates to normalize relations, which it accuses of violating Palestinian sovereignty. We'll start right away with the news. Stay with us. In Bolivia, members of the Unity Pact have rejected the recent agreement promoted between the legislature and the electoral branch, which establishes a new date for presidential elections now scheduled for the next October 18th.
The Bolivian Central Union and the Unity Pact, we are strongly disappointed, frustrated by this agreement that has been made under the table between the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the electoral branches. All three Spanish bodies have conferred, all three organs blockade of our Bolivian Workers' Senate. Of the Unity Pact and that frustration, we will determine the road that will be made from now on. Thank you very much.
The Bolivian Workers' Federation and the Unity Pact has never betrayed and will never betray its people. Today we had suffered a betrayal, and that the people must know. Demobilized. This law that has never agreed with us, that there has never been consensus with the Bolivian people. This agreement that we have never taken into account beyond the meetings we have attended. Between Nations Unity and the Catholic Church, we have not been part.
In Bolivia, the president of the Supreme Electoral Tribunal, Salvador Romero, ratified on 18 October this year as the new date of the presidential elections.
With the political forces, the regular communication allowed to know its conviction that the date of the election was acceptable, as well as its confidence in compliance with the schedule of the social movement's dialogue. In multiple meetings, it put in emphasis on explaining the reasons. October 18 is determined as day of voting, and in turn the full guarantees that are offered to organize the elections.
Meanwhile, the senator for the Mass, Milton Barron, insisted that the new date of elections is immovable because of being agreed with the different authorities of the country.
What do the Bolivian people want? Elections now, with a definite date. We don't want to be told tomorrow that due to the pandemic or the highest peak, we are changing to another date. So within the law, a date has been already set. We are putting the parameter until October 18, so that elections can be called, but with a final date. Whatever the date the electoral body puts, that day has to take place the election. Even if it rains, the sky falls, or an earthquake, that day the elections has to be held.
In another subject, in Colombia, an explosion broke off in the midst of a meeting between peasant communities of the Cauca region and representatives of the United Nations. This Thursday's meeting between peasant sectors of the Department of Cauca and a group of UN representatives was aimed to discuss the profound humanitarian crisis that peasants denounce is the non-compliance of the peace accords by the Colombian government. The explosion was defined by community members as routine acts of sabotage carried out by irregular armed groups that stalked the area.
We begin the meeting to condemn the systematic violation of the human rights by the National Army, which are based in the nearby areas. We saw the troops mobilizing at 200 meters from this place. There is a video recorded at 11:45 when we were in the midst of the meeting and heard a huge explosion by the moment of the speech of the president of the Cachicamo region. First, we have to say that all peasants were here in the meeting. Second, we want to denounce this as sabotage carried out by the military forces. UN members who have been here present are shot by the band.
And the Chilean Supreme Court has rejected the application submitted for the amparo the Mapuche leader Machi Celestino Córdoba that claims the violation of human rights. The second chamber of the court rejected the application and maintains his 18-year sentence for the Luxinger-McKay case. The Mapuche spiritual leader requested house arrest under humanitarian precepts established by the ILO, as well as the release of Mapuche political prisoners. The resolution follows 102 days in hunger strike from the Machi. And professionals from the medical field in Peru protested on Thursday demanding better payments and conditions amid an advance of infections among their ranks by the new coronavirus. Peruvian health workers' unions gathered outside the Ministry of Health insisting government authorities come to their aid. The medical and nursing unions are also requesting that the government grant a bonus of $205 per month to all healthcare personnel and not just those who work in critical areas. Meanwhile, at the Medical College of Peru, the Peruvian President Martín Vizcarra unveiled an obelisk in homage to the doctors who died from COVID-19.
We estimate around 70 to 100 health worker deaths. That's another thing we asked the government, to say how many people from the armed forces, police and health workers, from all those who are at the front of the battle, have died.
And dozens of Nicaraguan migrants in Panama demand to be returned to their homeland after being forced to leave their jobs in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic. Borders crossings in the country remain closed as a COVID-19 restrictive measure. Yet, migrants in the city of Panama demand they have no support of the government nor ways to afford to live properly. A group of 200 migrants, including women and children, are stranded in the Panama City bus terminal trying to travel back to their country as Panamanian institutions which could help foreigners are now closed given the country's COVID-19 restrictions.
The situation here is very difficult for us because there is no work. We have been unemployed for 5 months, and for us it is better to be in our country right now because there we do not pay rent, we are not getting into debt, and we really have a family that can help us with some food.
And U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo announced the suspension of private chartered flights between the United States and Cuba starting in October. According to a statement, the decision will affect all charter flights under the jurisdiction of the U.S. Department of Transportation, except for authorized public charter flights to and from Havana, and authorized private charter flights from emergency medical purposes, search and rescue activities, and other travel deemed in the interest of the United States. Meanwhile, family visits to Cuba have been heavily impacted under the Trump administration, which banned commercial flights to all Cuban airports except Havana late last year before imposing the same restrictions on charter flights from the U.S. January. The latest measure aims at tightening the sanctions imposed by the United States against the Cuban people. I will go now to a short break. Follow us in Twitter at Telesur English and Luis Telesur. We'll be right back. And we're back with more news. Russian authorities have denounced foreign interference in the internal affairs of Belarus following violent protests orchestrated by Western powers.
We see clear efforts of foreign interference with affairs of the sovereign state in order to split the society and to destabilize the situation. We have seen the use of such methods in other countries. Any attempts to find some Russian footprint in the organization of unrest in the country are groundless. These trails lead to other directions. We have given relevant facts to the Belarusians, and these facts are in public access. I want to stress that Russia remains a solid ally and friend of Belarus and the Belarusian people.
Irish Prime Minister Michael Martin has stated that progress is being made in Brexit trade talks after meeting with British Prime Minister Boris Johnson for the first time since taking office in June. As the talks are ongoing to reach a deal between London and Brussels, neighboring Ireland, which is a member of the European Union, has expressed concern regarding the impact on border issues with Northern Ireland. The Brexit talks are set to continue until October, but fears are growing that a deal will not be reached before the deadline on December 31st.
Say that I think where there's a will, there's a way. It seems to me that there is a landing zone, if that will is there on both sides, and I think it is, on the European Union side and on the British side, to find that landing zone. We both agreed on the absolute necessity for a free trade agreement that would be tariff-free, quota-free, that's the best possible outcome for the European Union, for the United Kingdom.
United Kingdom authorities have added France and Netherlands to the list of countries from where travelers must undergo a mandatory quarantine period on arrival in the UK, following a recent surge in COVID-19 cases in those two countries.
Well, today, this evening, we're announcing that there will now be quarantine brought in for a number of other locations, now including France, Holland and some others. And that's because we've absolutely worked so hard to make sure that we're keeping our numbers down here, and we can't afford to re-import those cases from elsewhere. People who are in France or indeed Holland or one or two other places that we're announcing this evening who are added to the quarantine list, we're saying to people you can stay and finish your holiday, but you have to be aware you will have to quarantine after that, and that is mandatory, I'm afraid, because we do need to protect the lower rates we've managed to establish in this country.
And the trade war between the United States and China has now extended to social media and the internet, which has become the latest battlefield between the two world powers. Let's see.
Under the alleged interest of protecting American citizens' privacy, Trump's administration is conducting a campaign against the widely used TikTok and WeChat apps, bringing the US-China hostilities to a new level, the world of social networks applications.
I don't understand this ban. They are very popular, very convenient. We basically use them every day.
Trump's ban on WeChat is likely to cause problems for users and businesses dealing with China from the United States. In China, these platforms are used by 72% of the 1.4 billion Chinese population. Here, the WeChat platform is more than a social media app. It is used to buy products, stock investment, travel, and even check the health status of people in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic.
TikTok is very popular among young people, and WeChat is used every day to read books, listen to music, go shopping, watch movies, then to talk to friends now that many are away or working in other places.
China has requested to not politicize issues which are economic. Beijing thinks that the sanctions against these platforms only seek to maintain the monopoly of high technology by the United States, which last year used similar excuses to expel the giant international 5G network Huawei from the United States, pressing its international allies to follow the same path.
Under the excuse of defending national security, the United States frequently abuses its power and unjustly represses non-US companies, which is a clear act of bullying, and China opposed this position firmly.
The United States is used to impose their way of life that goes from fashion to entertainment, always on the rest of the world. Now, Washington sees the advancement of these Chinese platforms as a threat to its national security, the same country that demands the world to be open to Google and Facebook in the name of globalization. This country now closes the doors to TikTok and WeChat.
Irán Peraza, Telesur, Beijing, China.
And China has also demanded the United States to put a halt to discriminatory measures against Chinese companies with the aim of clearing a path towards implementing a Phase 1 trade deal between the two countries.
The coronavirus pandemic and the restrictive measures the US imposed on Chinese exports undoubtedly affected the purchase of certain goods and services. Under the current circumstances, it is necessary for both parties to work together and overcome the difficulties. We hope the US stops the restrictive measures and discriminatory actions towards Chinese companies and create conditions to implement the Phase 1 trade deal.
And we have more news coming up after a final short break, so stay with us. And Israel and the United Arab Emirates announced they had reached an agreement on Thursday to normalize relations. The deal was brokered by the United States, with President Donald Trump taking the credit for facilitating what he called a historical peace agreement, which would see the United Arab Emirates become the third Arab state to have full diplomatic ties with Israel after Egypt and Jordan. A joint statement by the UAE, Israel and the U.S. said the breakthrough would advance peace in the Middle East region. As part of the agreement, Israel agreed to suspend the annexation of parts of the occupied West Bank, at least for now. And so the Palestinian National Authority has rejected the agreement, highlighting the move undermines the Arab Peace Initiative and decisions over the Palestinian cause.
The Palestinian leadership announces its strong rejection and condemnation of the surprise American-Israeli Emirati tripartite declaration on a full normalization of relations between the occupying Israeli states and the United Arab Emirates, in exchange of an alleged temporary suspension of the plan to annex Palestinian lands and extend Israel's sovereignty over them. The Palestinian leadership sees this step as torpedoing the Arab Peace Initiative, the decisions of the Arab and Islamic summits, and international law, as well as an aggression against the Palestinian people and a neglect of the Palestinian rights and sanctities, first and foremost Jerusalem and the independent Palestinian state according to the borders of June 4, 1967.
And also, residents in the Gaza Strip, together with representatives of the Palestinian resistance movement, Hamas, denounced the agreement between Israel and the United Arab Emirates, noting it undermines the legitimate struggle of the Palestinian people to end the Israeli occupation.
This agreement does not serve the Palestinian cause at all. It serves the Zionist ideas. This agreement encourages the occupation to continue in denying the rights of all Palestinian people. Rather, it is the continuation of crimes and aggression against all Palestinian people. What was required was always to support the legitimate Palestinian struggle against the occupation, not to establish relations with it. As Palestinians, we cannot confront the annexation plan with comprehensive resistance supported by the Arab and international communities, not through normalization agreements with the occupation. We condemn the process of normalization with Israel. We all hope that the United Arab Emirates will offer support and aid to the Palestinian cause, not normalization. This is something that doesn't serve the Palestinian cause and is against the interests of the Palestinian people. Normalization does not serve the Arab nation and does not serve any Arab countries. This normalization could open the way for other Arab countries to follow the example of the Arab Emirates. There are Arab peace initiatives. The United Arab Emirates does not respect them, does not respect the agreements, and does not respect the feelings of the Palestinian people.
The caretaker, government of Lebanon announced on Thursday the extension of the state of emergency that was decreed after the explosion in the port of Beirut. The state of emergency will last until August 21st. According to Lebanese law, a state of emergency can only be declared once by the government and for an 8-day period. It is then up to the Legislative Assembly to decide whether or not to extend it through a vote. The measure means the Lebanese army will have exceptional powers over civil matters, and it will be responsible for national security during this period. The UN Food and Agriculture Organization is fighting the ongoing desert locust infestations in East Africa, which pose a threat to people's livelihoods and food security. Significant progress has been made in a number of countries, especially in Kenya, where just a few of the 29 counties that were infested in February this year still have locusts today. According to the FAO, the threat of possible reinfestation towards the end of the year calls for careful and continuous surveillance. From the beginning of January up until early August, the infestation of over 600,000 hectares across the East Africa region has been brought under control, which estimates that over 500 billion locusts have been killed in the entire region.
We wanted to control them as fast as possible before they reach in stage 5 and young adults, who will start again maybe copulating and laying more eggs. So we need to control it very fast.
We continue to monitor because locusts can go into places that cannot be easily reached and then emerge from there. So we will continue to strengthen our surveillance capacity, our control efforts, and our livelihood recovery efforts. So it's a process. So we can't specify a specific date that by this date they will go, but we can simply say by this date we have contained to a large extent what could have been a disaster.
And we've come to the end of this news brief now. You can find this and many other stories at our website at telesurenglish.net. And you can also join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I am Luis de Jesus. Thank you for watching.